For those who are joining us via the Bridge 99 channel, then of course we extend our appreciation to you. And remember, you can also live chat with us on our YouTube platform. Again, thank you so much. This is a program that you can hear about your human rights and keep in touch with what is happening with the government's legislative agenda and how it impacts you. Now, as usual, we're going to be starting our show with getting a sense of what the issues were that arose in the news last week up to yesterday, if you will. And there's some exciting discussions that we are going to be having as well. Serious but exciting, if you will, because our mantra, of course, is that we want people to be excited about human rights, understand their issues. Now, I want to start with a call that Senator Dr. Floyd Morris made during his presentation in the House of Senate, where he has called on his colleagues and the Parliament to ensure that the Disabilities Act, though it is now enforced, we want to ensure that different aspects of it's currently being implemented. And if you remember, Dr. Morris was on JFJ's Let's Start Justice program, where we had several items under discussion about the status of the implementation of the legislation and how we can really fast track it. Because certainly we can't have something that we waited on so long to still be waiting on implementation of it. Now, the government would have seen the Firearms Act being gazetted, so it's now enforced in law. I think effective November 1. I'm speaking from memory. But important to the Firearms Act since then is that the government would have announced its gun amnesty, which commenced November 5, and it goes up to 2 weeks. So for those perhaps who believe that they should have gotten a licensed firearm and for whatever reason they didn't get it from the FLA and they are in possession of an illegal weapon, if you will, or illegal possession of a firearm, this is your opportunity to make your submission to the nearest police station or to the nearest offices of the FLA, which is island-wide. Or for those perhaps who may have come in contact with an illegal possession of a firearm, you want to ensure that you take up that opportunity. I think I want to urge the government to really revisit whether the 2-week amnesty is sufficient and whether the current public education that the government is undertaking, I think it's being led by the FLA, and if I'm not mistaken, through the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs. But perhaps we would have to revisit how effective the gun amnesty would be when we look at the current public education that the government is undertaking. I think one of the main things of importance last week that we heard as well is that a joint select committee has been convened, and the chairperson of that committee is Minister Marlene Malahoo Fort. And if you remember, that joint select committee has been convened to review the bail bill, which is to replace and repeal the current Bail Act that we have. And if you remember, the minister would have indicated that the bail bill that has been drafted, and we had that discussion here on the JFJ Let's Start Justice program, will be looking at bail being considered pre-charge bail after you have been charged and for post-conviction. And there are a number of interesting items. JFJ, we will be making a submission to the Joint Select Committee. We're doing our review now, and we're looking at certain areas, how constitutional it may be, and we're going to be making some recommendations to the Joint Select Committee. So, yes, please keep your ear out for that particular issue. Now, just to transition a little bit, again, I'm filling in for Jade because normally she would do the trivia and the right of the day, pose those questions to us. Producer, can you put it up on the screen? I don't have it readily at hand. So the right of the day, and we just had a discussion about the bail bill. The right of the day will be focusing on liberty and security. And this is one of the fundamental rights that you have. Normally you will hear the right to liberty, security, and life. So liberty and security for today is focusing on the right to personal freedom, which really means that the police or no one else can imprison you or detain you without just and reasonable cause. It's an important right in our Constitution, and it really speaks to the matter of arbitrary arrest and detention. So just want to remind persons that liberty and security, though the crime rate is high, we don't want to go down a stage where we see our fundamental rights being abrogated by the state or anyone else. So that is our right of the day, liberty and security. And our trivia question that we're going to be posing to the public, and I'm urging persons again to make their submissions to our WhatsApp number, that's 239-7583, and you can also post your responses on our social media platforms. But it's a bonus trivia. I think you're going to be getting $2,000 credit and a t-shirt. And the question is, when was the Indecom Act passed? And list the agents of the state for which Indecom provides oversight. So when was the Indecom Act passed, and list the agents of the state for which Indecom provides oversight. All right. And I'm going to be joined in studio by a special guest today. So though Jade is not with me, I think I'll be comfortably supported by the Indecom's commissioner, Mr. Hugh Faulkner, who is also an attorney at law. We're going to be joining us via Zoom and phone Susan Goff, who is a human rights advocate and a former director with Jamaicans for Justice, and also Kenyatta Powell, attorney at law. And the discussion that we're going to be having today is policing the police, the role and function of Indecom. Now, several statements recently were made by the National Security Minister, Dr. Horace Chang, as well as the chairman of the Police Federation, Corporal Rohan James, where their statements have reignited the conversation about the role and functions of the Independent Commission of Investigation, Indecom. And we know that since the establishment of Indecom, the number of police fatal shootings have seen a decline, but recent data suggests a trend in the wrong direction. When we look at 2019, there were 86 people fatally shot by members of the security forces. And by the way, in 2019, 86 persons represented the lowest number in almost 2 decades. However, when we look at 2020, we saw 115 persons fatally shot by the police. 2021 recorded a total of 127 fatal shootings involving members of the security forces. And then when we look at 2022, between January and September of this year, Indecom reported that 97 persons were killed by members of the security forces. And if I recall, the reports from Indecom in October at that time had some 19 persons who were fatally shot. Now, we have had some concerns raised by Indecom and members of civil society, such as JFJ, but Dr. Chang, in response, doubled down and suggested that the public should prepare for an increase in deadly police shootings. The minister cautioned that as the police capabilities and intelligence gathering grow, their encounters with criminals will in fact increase.
At the stage we're at, Madam Speaker, we're going to have more fatal shootings. In fact, it's inevitable because the police intelligence is getting better.
Dr. Chang made his assertions while speaking in the House of Representatives, and we are going to be having some discussions around that because he remained unapologetic as he maintains that in an engagement with violent criminals, he expects the police to win as they are trained to respond.
I expect at all times the policemen who are trained, and that's why they train them well. They are trained effectively that when they engage in combat with criminals, they must win. And I have no apologies for that. I want them to win, I expect them to win, and we train them and provide the equipment to do so.
That was Dr. Chang speaking in the House of Representatives. Now, the Police Federation has also levied its own criticism against Indecom, accusing the body of acting as a human rights lobby group. This was after Indecom raised concerns about the 19 fatal shootings that happened in the month of October. Now, Dr. Chang, in another interview on another radio station, seemingly in support of the Police Federation's criticism, noted that in some instances, Indecom has gone outside of its mandate of investigation. And this going outside of its mandate, according to Dr. Chang, has led to low morale within the rank and file of the JCF.
Sometimes it does overreach because the purpose of Indecom is to deal with, in particular, shooting. Where the state injures somebody, especially by shooting, it has a right to be examined by an independent commission. Indecom sometimes become almost seek to discover this very force for the professional body. And that creates a challenge because to administer discipline for a professional body outside of the institution creates all kind of challenges. When you begin to, you get an officer that goes on interdiction for a year and a half. The challenge it becomes contentious rather than corrective.
All right, that was Dr. Horace Chang, Minister of National Security. We're going to be taking a break, and then when we return, we're going to be joined by Susan Goff, Human Rights Advocate, Kenyatta Powell, Attorney at Law, and as I indicated, Mr. Hugh Faulkner, the Commissioner of Indecom, is in studio with me, and we're going to be starting that conversation. We'll talk after the break. And here in studio with me is Mr. Hugh Faulkner, Attorney at Law and Commissioner of Indecom.
Thank you, Mikhail. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for joining.
Right.
And we have via Zoom, I believe, Ms. Susan Goff, who is a human rights advocate and a former, I would say former director of JFJ, but still a supporter and partner with the organization, and of course, Attorney at Law, Kenyatta Powell. Welcome to you both.
Thank you for the invitation. Happy to join the discussion.
Great. So, Commissioner Faulkner, let me just start with you. You've heard the clippings from Dr. Chang, and in one of them, in the interview, he indicated that Indecom is overreaching and you're not acting within your mandate. For purposes of the discussion, can you just remind persons who Indecom provides oversight for, one, and also what is your remit in terms of investigation? Because Dr. Chang indicated that it is just to investigate fatal shootings.
Right. Thank you very much, Mikhail. If we look at the preamble to the Independent Commission of Investigations Act, it states that the mandate of Indecom is to undertake investigations concerning actions by members of the security forces and other agents of the state that result in death or injury to persons or the abuse of the rights of persons.
Yes.
And for connected matters. So you would see the broad ambit
Yes.
of the mandate that Parliament accorded Indecom.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Powell, Kenyatta, what was your opinion of the comment made by Dr. Chang? Okay, not hearing Kenyatta. Ms. Goff, just to switch with you for this moment, I'm not sure if you had any reactions to that comment before I asked you the question I had for you.
I think we need to be clear that the comments that Minister Chang made are very much in line with comments that have been made by many ministers of national security in Jamaica since independence, and that it speaks to an attitude the state has towards the use of the role of the police. And so I don't think that it is surprising, shocking
Yes.
as it may be. It's not surprising. And I have heard some of the explanations by the minister himself and others of his statement to say that he was not in fact encouraging the police to go out and execute people, but he was encouraging them to defend themselves and defend themselves robustly if their lives or their safety were in danger. And I don't think there is anyone who believes that the police should not defend themselves when they are in situations that warrant it. But one of the things that for me raised an issue with the intention that the minister had in what he stated and what he was communicating were the following comments
Yes.
about not calling an ambulance and
Yes.
the seeming um, encouragement not to pay much attention in those situations to the provision of medical care for anyone who may have been shot or injured by the police. And that to me, taken with the previous statement, gives a certain signal, which we may parse it and say this was not his intention in his speech about the shooting, the returning fire, the self defense, but you need to take them together to look at the signal that was being sent.
Yes. Mr. Faulkner?
Yes. In completion of your question,
Yes.
for the benefit of your listeners, again, the legislation outlines what the security forces mean. It means the Jamaica Constabulary Force, the Jamaica Defense Force, the Island Special Constabulary Force, the Rural Police, Parish Special Constables, and specified official means correctional officer.
Thanks. And I want to clarify with the JDF because I remember being in an interview with you in another space, and the question was asked why wasn't Indecom investigating the sexual assault claims within the JDF, and you made a clarification that your remit within JDF is really when they're working in concert with the JCF.
Yes, and I will bring that section to your attention.
Yes.
Any member of whatever rank of the Jamaica Defense Force when acting in support of the Jamaica Constabulary Force.
So my question to you, Mr. Faulkner, given that you have this oversight function, so to speak, of the police, and I don't want to push the narrative that there is any adversarial relationship at all between Indecom and members of the security forces. But I think listening to Corporal Rohan James and listening to the Minister of National Security, there seems to be some disconnect with the relationship and this supposed conversation that Indecom's role in such fulfillment is undermining perhaps or devaluing the moral of the police force. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Right. Well, Indecom had represented the establishment of an independent civilian oversight body.
Yes.
Prior to Indecom, there was oversight, but in fairness, it could not have been described as independent and totally civilian oversight body. So you would expect some pushback, and
Yes.
I do not believe that that will dissipate overnight. And I am mindful that in any jurisdiction where crime and murder is a challenge, then there will be persons who are willing to surrender
Yes.
the oversight mechanisms so that law enforcement bodies can act as both judge, jury, and executioner. So we embrace those comments. We do not support them, but we embrace the fact that persons are likely to make comments which are not in support of Indecom due to possibly the circumstances that they face, but we would advise them that the better position in support of the rule of law and their own inherent security of person is for the security forces to be under a regime of independent civilian oversight.
Yes. Thank you so much. Ms. Goff, back to you. I'm not sure if you have Kenyatta online as yet, but I just want you to paint a picture for us from when you sat in the chair at JFJ. What was the police involved fatal shootings like then? The allegations of police abuse compared to now. Have you seen much improvement? What is your view of the then versus now?
I think for me, one of the most important things to look at when you are comparing the past situation with the present is, in fact, what happened when there were police shootings.
Yes.
and Mr. Faulkner, Commissioner Faulkner, spoke about the previous regime where there was not really the existence of an independent civilian body. There was the Police Public Complaints Authority, which was a civilian body, but it was weak in its powers by law, and it was underfunded and understaffed, and so it had a capacity problem. And you also had the Bureau of Special Investigations, which was a police department that was also tasked with these investigations. And often when there was a police shooting, no one would come. There was no protection of the scene, so that very often scenes were tampered with, and not just in a mild way and, you know, the occasional person walking through, but there were numerous accounts of the police cleaning up the scene.
Yes.
So things like, you know, washing it down, hosing it down, etc. The picking up of artifacts, you know, evidence. There was a very poor chain of custody for evidence. Very often there were no photographs. Often there were long delays, days, sometimes weeks, sometimes never would there be a team coming on the scene to collect evidence. That, you know, so that the situation now is very different. And in a situation where you have this lack of follow-up investigation after incident, then there is basically impunity.
Yes.
And that is the then and the now that we need to look at very carefully.
All right. I realize Kenyatta is now on. Kenyatta, welcome to the program. Thank you so much. Let me ask you a question. I listened to Dr. Chang speak, and in his estimation, the Jamaica Constabulary Force has been strengthened compared to what you heard Ms. Goff explaining with the police civilian oversight at the time and the challenges with the Bureau of Special Investigation and so on. But Dr. Chang has asserted that in his estimation, iProbe is there, and therefore a lot of the things that Indecom is investigating, he believes that iProbe can take charge of, and Indecom should just focus on fatal shootings. Do you have any opinion on that? Still not hearing Kenyatta.
Hello, are you hearing me?
Hearing you now, yes.
Can you repeat your question, please?
I'm asking you to respond to Dr. Chang's comment that with the strengthening of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, that Indecom should just focus on police fatal shootings and allow iProbe, for example, to really look at the other allegations of abuse and so on. And I'm asking if you have any opinion on that recommendation coming from the minister.
Well, my opinion would be absolutely not. The thing about, and the commissioner went over this, I think a little bit, but I would want to expand on it.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that the only way in which the security forces can actually violate your rights and your dignity is by killing somebody. The idea that that is the only way that you can, a person can be violated is just not true. So if you are detained illegally, right? If the security forces trespass on your property without the proper legal authorization to be there, all of those kinds of actions can be extremely traumatic and can be detrimental to the citizen. And so we run into, I think, the same kind of problem that Susan was talking about when we didn't have a completely independent
Yes.
Oversight body where there was. We don't have to go into whether or not it was deliberate or it was just a culture expressing itself, right? We just have to deal with the facts. And the fact is that when we did not have complete independent civilian oversight, right, the quality of the investigation of the police investigating themselves, it simply wasn't there, right? It simply wasn't there. And so no, no, I don't agree with the Minister of National Security about limiting the remit of Indecom. There was an issue a few years back. This question about
Kenyatta, please hold that thought for me. We're going to have to take a break, but please hold the thought. As soon as we return, I will start back with you. Before the break, Kenyatta, you were saying that you do not agree with the Minister of National Security that iProbe can be the agency or department that replaces some functions of Indecom, and you're about to share a story with us to further your perspective.
Yes, so I was thinking about Indecom's report. I said a few years back, I believe it was last year or maybe late 2020. Indecom's report detained at pleasure, where we were introduced, and I say introduced, but we're introduced to the situation again, relating to people who had been detained either because they were unfit to plea or
Yes.
for other issues, detained at initially the Governor General's pleasure and then the court's pleasure, right? And the quality of the work that Indecom, an agency outside of the correctional services, with a clear mandate and a clear remit, a clear oversight remit, the quality of the work they were able to do, and the kind of report Indecom was able to put together, right, to bring to the public, the public consciousness in Jamaica to say, this is what is happening all too often in our correctional facilities. That kind of work from an independent civilian agency, right, is indispensable, and I don't think that we should be going down the road of trying to tear down Indecom and to lessen its remit. Because what we know about security forces and correctional services, across several jurisdictions, is that a sort of fraternity forms within these organizations, right?
Yes.
And in the same way that there is in certain other subcultures an unwillingness to inform, right? An unwillingness to seem like you are a traitor, right? You are the one letting down the side, right? That kind of culture develops within security forces, and I don't think it does us any good to pretend otherwise. The security forces are very poor at investigating themselves, and I would say that basically of any human being, any group of human beings would be very poor at actually investigating themselves. So no, we shouldn't be looking in that direction. It would be a retrograde step.
I hope both of you, Susan and Kenyatta, can stay with us a few minutes. But let me switch back to you, Mr. Faulkner. One of the things that we saw coming out of that Privy Council ruling, of course, that Indecom would have lost its prosecutorial powers, yes? Unless there is a situation wherein persons perhaps did not respond to certain questions and so on that perhaps Indecom would have asked during its investigation. And we had some support for Indecom's prosecutorial powers to be pushed through Parliament. I think one of those support would have been Minister Chuck, and he withdrew it after to say at this stage, let's focus on working more with the Department of Public Prosecution. How has that relationship been like with the DPP? Have we seen more charges being laid, more prosecution successfully being done? What is the charges and prosecution rate that we have had in recent times?
Well, we surrender to the decision of the Privy Council. As you may recall, there was somewhat of a bit of a roller coaster in terms of the decisions with regard to the prosecutorial authority of Indecom until it was settled by the Privy Council. And the cabinet decision has been clear. So what we have resorted to do is abide by our mandate and the legislation as it now is.
Yes.
And we seek to work harmoniously with the Director of Public Prosecutions. And we bear in mind that the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions celebrated 60 years of operations. And so they would have acquired a great deal of jurisprudential experience, etc. So we believe we can work comfortably with the Office of Director of Public Prosecutions. There have been instances within late July to early August when we needed intervention from the Office of the DPP on a weekend to provide ruling, so that if that ruling is for a particular action, that arrests could be made, etc. And in at least two high-profile matters, and their response was quite encouraging. So at this point, I would not have anything adverse to say about the relationship.
So the charges and the prosecution rates have seen an increase when we compare some reports coming from same JFJ here and Amnesty. Have we seen increase in the charges and successful prosecution?
In July, August, there was a flurry of rulings in favor of charge, but we'll be soon compiling our data
so
for,
we'll
for the
that.
year. Yes,
okay.
so, which will give us a clearer picture. So I wouldn't let just July and August sway me into saying it has increased, etc. But it apparently on the face of it.
Okay. Ms. Goff, to you, we've heard the DPP make utterances last week, and we've put them in perspective at JFJ because I think she made a very nuanced speech overall. But there were concerns about whether or not the DPP should have spoken that Indecom and JFJ should be doing more to educate the public around arrest and their interaction with the security forces and being more respectful and so on. As a human rights advocate, do you have any response to that? Or just generally around the issue of charges and prosecution from the DPP's office?
No, I would comment on the issue, and it isn't only the DPP who has raised it, about organizations like JFJ and Indecom doing more to tell people not to resist arrest or to interfere with an arrest that is going on. As far back as I can remember, Jamaicans for Justice has given that kind of advice. And one of the reasons certainly in the early days when I was involved in the organization, one of the reasons we did that was because you were more likely to come out of a situation alive than if you resisted, because there was a propensity on the part of the police to escalate their response if you attempted to resist. So, I mean, this is nothing new for organizations like Jamaicans for Justice. And I remember numerous occasions on which Indecom has made that kind of advice. But I just want to put into the discussion of this issue the fact that we need to look at why it is at times that people do resist arrest.
Yes.
And one of the things is there have been quite a number of instances recorded, documented, in which people go into police custody alive and arrive at the other end of that journey dead, whether it is on the doorstep of KPH or elsewhere. So I think we need to be careful about this this belief that it is a very benign and utterly fear-free situation to allow oneself to be taken into police custody.
Yes.
And I just want to put that in, that we need to look at what the lived experience of many people and communities have been with people being arrested by the police.
Thank you so much. Kenyatta, my last question to you. We heard Minister National Security saying that he doesn't believe that the scale is balanced perhaps to support the police? Because in his estimation, and I think he used an example that I did find alarming, really, to suggest that when you look at, for example, the Klansman trial and so on, you have persons of criminal elements who are supported through free legal aid by the state, and perhaps the government ought to be supporting police officers some more in the provision of legal services. As an attorney and a public commentator, how would you respond to the call from the Minister of National Security for the government of Jamaica to support police officers in the provision of legal services should they come in conflict with the law around issues or allegations of police abuse and any form of misconduct, including fatal shootings?
Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing.
I would remind the Minister of National Security that he is the Minister of National Security, and that therefore means that he is a member of the Cabinet of Jamaica, the chief the chief executive body of Jamaica, the body responsible for making policy, and I'd also remind him that in our governmental system, the one that we have, the fact that he's the Minister of National Security and a member of the Cabinet means that he is also a legislator, right? And it means that he is a part of the majority party in the parliament. Yes. I've said all of this to say that I do find it a little odd that a senior member of the government of Jamaica is publicly, complaining or commenting about whether or not the government of Jamaica should provide members of the security forces who are accused of violations with effective legal aid. So that strikes me. Every time I hear it, it strikes me as odd.
But right? Would you support that call for the police force to officers to get legal services?
Absolutely, because at base, my perspective is my approach to these things comes from a very strong human rights approach.
Yes.
Police officers, members of the security forces are human beings. And so they must be given effective, they have a right to counsel whenever they are accused, right? And certainly if they are acting on behalf of the state, they're acting on behalf of the government, I absolutely think the government has a responsibility to ensure that they have effective counsel if they can't afford it when they're accused of violations. But again, I say that I do find that call to be a little odd coming from a senior member of the government.
And
right?
more so time for action if such belief is
yes,
there. Okay.
Yeah, because that person has much more power than you or I or the Commissioner of Indecom or Susan Goff or any human rights advocate to ensure that kind of policy. Does it need some kind of legislative fix? He's a member of the legislature. Does it need some kind of policy direction? Then make policy. It just seems to me like this is being used as another way to attack and to tear down Indecom, and it comes off as look at all these poor police officers, and Indecom is harassing them and they don't have proper legal representation. And my response to that is, do your job as government and ensure that they have proper legal representation.
All right, great. So we're going to have to leave it there. I'm going to ask Mr. Faulkner just to stay with me. I hope you don't have another meeting and you can stay with me a few more minutes.
Right.
But Kenyatta Powell, attorney at law, Susan Goff's human rights advocate, thank you so much for joining. We appreciate you, and certainly we will have you again on the program soon. We're still tackling the topic of policing the police, exploring the roles and functions of Indecom. And here in studio with me still, thank you so much, Mr. Hugh Faulkner, Commissioner of Indecom. So we've heard the conversations about role of Indecom and so on. Let me ask, Indecom, in your capacity, do you provide public education to the public around, how to engage with police officers, or do you provide training, sensitization sessions to police officers or any member of the security forces? Or
Yes.
is it just investigative powers, really?
Right. We believe to properly execute our functions and also to foster buy-in from the public and our stakeholders, the security forces. We have a dedicated regime to sensitize officers, and that's one of our key performance indicators.
Yes.
In fact, to one of our grant funders, and you know the value of grant funding.
Unfortunately, we have to.
Right. So we ensure that all our teams convene sensitization sessions. Most of these sessions last between 1.5 hours to 2 hours.
Okay.
And the law enforcement bodies, we put forward the basis for our existence, our mandate, how we execute our mandate, the core values that guide what we do. And I am pleased to say, currently, Indecom is investigating matters where officers, serving officers, are the complainants. We have indicated, and we have in court a matter now where a retired officer, well-known officer, is the complainant.
And you know, I'm happy you said that, because it's the same situation at JFJ. We've had officers who call to make reports. And I think this perception that there's some adversarial relationship between human rights organization, Indecom, and so on, with the security force, I think we have to put things in perspective, you know. So I'm happy you put forward that example, certainly.
Yes, but Michael, we have to be introspective also.
Yes.
So while I am satisfied with our level of sensitization for the security forces and to explain our mandate, how we function impartially, objectively, and independently, I believe we can do more with regard to the public sensitization. So in my 6-point goal under the new strategic vision for Indecom, the expansion of our family liaison officer corps. Currently, we have one family liaison officer serving the entire island. In 2016...
And that officer exists to do what? Just for clarification.
Right. So that officer will, first of all, make where persons are victims, alleged victims of whether fatality, abuse, injury, etc. That person can liaise with the complainants or families of deceased victims, and at first provide empathetic and sympathetic contact, because regardless of what you say about somebody who is deceased after confrontation with the police force, many times there's a mother, there's a father, there are children who are grieving. So regardless of the narrative that is painted against that person, so we seek to make that empathetic, sympathetic contact. So we establish that relationship through a family liaison officer. We are seeking to also, over time, to have social intervention referral. There are instances where something happens, Indecom goes on the scene, and you may observe that the victims' families, no food, no running water, no bathroom facilities, children not going to school. Sometimes if someone is deceased from the confrontation, they do not know where to start to find the funding for burial. So we are seeking to establish a mechanism just for referral, so it does not interfere with our investigation, for these social intervention to be done. So far we have taken steps to direct persons where to get the funeral grants, where to get education grant, to whether psychological or psychiatric support, rehabilitation grant, etc. And we have also made referral to the Ministry of Labor, and they have done home visits to inquire into the circumstances of these people.
Great. We have a caller, but you know, I'm happy you said it, because the presumption of innocence must be front and center.
Indeed.
And no matter the criminal record of the victim, the person is still a victim, because certainly human life is sacrosanct. We have a caller. Go ahead. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much.
In terms of the statement, I must first clearly state that I have not heard it verbatim from the minister himself.
Yes.
But based on my understanding of it, is that it would have been, in my view, a sad statement.
Which one? That the minister made several in the past few weeks. Which one are you speaking to?
The one as it pertains to Indecom and the role of Indecom
as
not investigator, but to deal with extrajudicial shootings.
Yes.
That in itself has to take on investigations, because once there is an extrajudicial shooting, the Indecom would first has to go in and do some investigations before they can come to their findings.
I think the minister, just for clarification, he was saying that Indecom should focus only on fatal shootings, but all of the other incidents that Mr. Faulkner had mentioned, for example, sexual assault allegations, assault allegations itself, I think one of them, let me double check, assault and battery, damage to property, asking for money and taking of money rather, is what the Indecom Act speaks to. I think those things were what the minister was indicating Indecom should perhaps leave up to iProbe.
No, but if it is in the act, why take Indecom away from it? It is in their mandate, and if that is their mandate, as a matter of fact, most of Jamaica would even know the others, because most of what Jamaica knows Indecom for is extrajudicial shootings, or matters to do with the security forces. Shooting in a questionable, shootings in general. It doesn't have to be questionable shootings, because once a shooting takes place and Indecom goes in, the findings would tell you whether or not it is questionable or not.
Because I was just about to ask Mr. Faulkner to clarify, because I don't think you assume that any shooting is extrajudicial before you start an investigation.
No, that is why when we refer to fatal shootings, the term fatal shooting is a neutral term.
Yes.
When you say murder, you become incriminatory.
Yes.
So we term it. So the word homicide, which is the killing of a human being, neutral.
Yes.
Fatal shooting, neutral.
Yes.
And if you ask me, police involved killing, also neutral.
Yes.
When you use the term murder, in my view, you become incriminatory. And we are careful as to our terminologies so that you do not rush to judgment or lead the public to rush to judgment.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you, caller.
And again, let me just clarify, and let me just make some addition to what I'm saying. Indecom and Mr. Faulkner, I know is good afternoon, Mr. Faulkner.
Yeah, good afternoon. How are you doing?
I know that you're a balanced person. I have been interfaced with you. I think you bring some credibility and some humility to their role.
Thank you.
And I hope to see better. The fact of the matter is that there has been a standoff with the police in the and the DPP's office for some time, and in my view, has been ignored. If they are creatures of parliament, we should have clear lines of demarcation drawn as to what are their roles and responsibilities. And when they happen to overstep and interface with each other, somebody must behave neutrally to say where it happens and bring back the parties, because all the parties that are put together to deal with the laws of Jamaica, and in particular our justice system, which is really in a bad state right now.
I have to leave it there because the producer's giving me side eye views because we're coming up on the time. Thank you so much. I hope you call back next week. We're going to be focusing on an interesting topic with children who come in conflict with the law. So I hope you call back next week and we can speak some more. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, my brother.
Right. The trivia of the day, Karan. We haven't had nobody won that? Interesting. And the answers were spoken throughout the show, you know. Oh, okay. So we're having some technical challenges. So we will announce the winner on our social media platforms. But just 15 seconds, Mr. Faulkner. What are your calls around body-worn cameras and so on? Just 15 seconds. Some main points around call for reform.
Right. Well, I would tie body-worn cameras to our quest now to improve the forensic
Yes.
capability of Indecom. So the Parliament will in short order get my recommendations in terms of enhancing our core of forensic personnel. We'll be restructuring that department to make us more effective. Body-worn cameras, where the evidence is reliable, not tampered with, not edited, is a helpful addition to the investigative process.
Yes.
And there are certain rules you have to follow for it to be admissible in court. But I support that and can't wait for it to be introduced.
All right. I said 15 minutes, but it was 15 seconds. Thank you so much for joining me, Mr. Hugh Faulkner, Commissioner of Indecom. And thank to all the listeners. This was Let's Start Justice. We will see each other next week. I'm Michael Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ. Have a good week.